Welcome back to Mysterious Galaxies. I've got my coffee in hand and a stack of books that made 2024 an unforgettable reading year. Today, we're diving into my 10 favorite books I read this year, and yes, there are a couple of things to note up front. First, this list includes a few rereads. Why? Because they still hit just as hard or harder than the first time, and honestly, they deserve their place here. Second, I'm keeping it to one book per author. As much as I'd love to fill this list with First Law books, Joe Abercrombie fans, you know what I mean, or get entirely lost in the dark brilliance of Stephen King, I wanted to showcase a wider range of reads that left their mark on me. Now let's get into it. Here are my top 10 favorite books I read in 2024. Let's start with Reddit's favorite horror novel. This book is brought up more than most, and for good reason. Set during the Black Plague, it follows a disgraced knight, a mysterious girl, and a priest as they travel across a dying, demon infested France. Imagine the road meets medieval dark fantasy with a touch of horror that's unsettling but not overbearing. Between Two Fires is hauntingly beautiful. Buellman's prose feels poetic even as he paints a picture of humanity at its most desperate. It's a grim tale, but there's an unexpected tenderness in how it handles faith and redemption. It kind of reads like a more modern Canterbury Tales. I do have a few nitpicks, like it feeling a tad bit episodic without much reflection on past chapters. But even still, it's one of the better books I read this year. And it really makes me think why we don't see more books and media set during the Middle Ages. It's ripe for horror, dark fantasy, and historical fiction. If you like this book, I also recommend checking out Black Death with Sean Bean. It's fairly similar to Between Two Fires, and I imagine Buellman took some inspiration from the movie. If you followed my channel at all, you know that I read through all of Dungeon Crawler Carl within like a month and a half. So go check out those reviews of the series. For those unfamiliar, Dungeon Crawler Carl is a lit RPG story where Earth becomes a game show for the galaxy, and Carl, alongside his adorable feline companion, Princess Donut the Queen Anne Chunk, must navigate increasingly dangerous dungeons and stay alive long enough to seek revenge against our alien overlords. It's absurd, it's funny, and it's surprisingly heartfelt. While the series does have some ups and downs, the original novel is one of the strongest introductions I've read in a while. It's legitimately laugh out loud funny. I just couldn't put it down, and I ended up ripping through it in just over a day. Part of what makes Dungeon Crawler Carl so good is that it balances the ridiculous with genuine stakes, and Carl's relationship with Donut gives it an emotional core I didn't expect. Plus, it's just ridiculously entertaining. 10 books are planned in the series, but only 7 have been published so far. So if you're someone who doesn't want to start a series before it's finished, that is something you should keep in mind. So this is my first reread entry. I first read Altered Carbon in high school when I was learning about cyberpunk for the first time. And just like everyone else who was into anime and ninjas and rebelling against our corporate overlords, I fell in love with the genre and this novel. I decided to reread it this year because my wife really wanted to watch the Netflix show and I needed the refresher. Altered Carbon is cyberpunk noir at its absolute finest. The story takes place in a future where humanity has unlocked the secret to immortality, or at least a version of it. Consciousness can be digitized and transferred between bodies or sleeves, allowing the wealthy to live forever while everyone else scrapes by, often selling their bodies to make ends meet. Enter Takeshi Kovacs, a former elite soldier turned mercenary who is brought out of storage and into a sleeve to solve an impossible murder, the apparent suicide of a man who's still alive thanks to the magic or curse of this technology. What follows is a gritty, violent, and thought provoking tale that feels like Blade Runner on steroids, with a hefty dose of philosophical inquiry. Morgan crafts a world that is dark, neon lit, and unapologetically brutal. The atmosphere is electric. From the sleazy underbelly of Bay City to the pristine sky high fortresses of the ultra rich, every detail feels immersive and intentional. The ethical dilemmas Morgan raises about identity, mortality, and the commodification of human life are haunting. What does it mean to be human when your body is disposable? Can there be justice in a world where the rich hold the ultimate cheat code? These questions linger long after the final page. Even if you've watched the show but you haven't read the book, you really should. It's a quick read, kind of on the shorter side, and super entrancing. Although there are two sequels, Broken Angels and Woken Furies, I didn't like them nearly as much as I did the original. When it comes to dystopian fiction, Brave New World remains a benchmark for its chillingly prophetic vision of a future society that hits just way too close to home. Huxley's world is one where consumerism reigns supreme, individuality is sacrificed at the altar of stability, and people are conditioned from birth to embrace their predetermined role without question. Happiness is engineered through a drug called soma, which keeps the population blissfully complacent. Relationships are superficial, art and religion are obsolete, and concepts like pain and struggle, anything that might disrupt the social order, are eradicated. At its core, this book is less about dystopia itself and more about the mechanisms that create it. Unlike other classic dystopias, such as Orwell's 1984, which relies on overt oppression and fear, Huxley's world is terrifying because it achieves control through pleasure and convenience. People want to conform. They want the soma. They want the superficial distractions. It's a future where freedom is willingly traded for comfort, and in some ways, it feels more relevant now than ever. This book forces you to take a hard look at the world we live in. As I was reading, I couldn't help but draw parallels between Huxley's vision and the culture of instant gratification we see today. Social media serves as our soma. Endless entertainment keeps us distracted, and the drive for convenience far outweighs the desire for genuine connection or critical thought. Huxley's satire is sharp, almost scathingly so, and his ability to predict the societal trends that would emerge decades after the book publication is nothing short of remarkable. Every now and then, a book comes along that reminds you why you fell in love with science fiction in the first place. Leviathan Wakes, the first entry in the Expanse series, does exactly that. It's a sprawling space opera that combines the intrigue of a hard boiled mystery, the tension of a political thriller, and the jaw dropping spectacle of interstellar adventure. At its core, it's about humanity, not just as individuals, but as a species trying to survive and define itself in the vast emptiness of space. The story takes place in a colonized solar system on the brink of war, with tensions brewing between Earth and Mars and the Belters, those who live and work in the asteroid belt, enduring harsh conditions and low gravity for generations. Against this volatile backdrop, we follow two protagonists: Jim Holden, the idealistic and principled XO of an ice hauling ship, and Detective Joe Miller, a jaded cop on the Ceres station with a missing persons case that quickly spirals into something much larger. Their narratives collide as they uncover a conspiracy that threatens not just the fragile peace of the solar system, but the very survival of humanity itself. It earned its place on this list because few books manage to balance so many moving parts so effectively. Corey's world building is nothing short of incredible. The solar system feels lived in, it's gritty and real, with each faction, Earth, Mars, and the Belt, having distinct cultures, ideologies, and struggles. While I love the characters in this book, it really is the pacing that kept me engaged. Leviathan Wakes, it hooks you from the first chapter and it does not let go. The blend of high stakes action, space battles, political intrigue, and terrifying encounters with the mysterious proto-molecule is perfectly balanced with quieter, character driven moments that give the story emotional weight. It's a book that keeps you on the edge of your seat while making you care deeply about the people in the universe. This is the book that launched the genre and arguably reshaped how we imagine the future. Published in 1984, Neuromancer didn't just predict the rise of the internet, it defined the aesthetics of cyberpunk with its gritty neon lit streets, its shadowy corporations, and the blurred lines between humanity and technology. At its heart is Case, a washed up, down on his luck hacker whose ability to jack into cyberspace, the virtual like digital realm that connects the world, was once unmatched. But after crossing the wrong people, he's been left physically unable to connect to cyberspace, a fate far worse than death for someone like him. Enter Armitage, a mysterious employer who offers Case a chance to restore his abilities. There's just one small problem. He has to take on a dangerous high stakes heist that will take him to the edges of cyberspace and beyond. Now, this book, it's not going to be for everyone. The prose is kind of It has this electric energy that's chaotic and fragmented. It's a cool style, but it does make the book hard to follow at times. For me, though, the sentences feel like jagged wires sparking into life, perfectly mirroring the frantic, high tech, low life world he's created. From the moment you step into Chiba City's crowded, neon soaked streets, you feel like you've been plunged into another reality, a gritty, futuristic underworld where technology and humanity are inseparably intertwined. The world building is dense and immersive, throwing you into a future where the lines between the physical and the digital worlds, they're so blurred that cyberspace feels as real as the streets Case walks on. Neuromancer is more than just a classic. It's a blueprint for an entire genre and a book that continues to influence everything from movies to video games to our very understanding of technology. It's a thrilling, chaotic ride through a future that feels increasingly like our present. All right, all right. So I'm probably in the minority here, but The Heroes is the best book in the First Law universe, at least out of the first six books. I can't comment on the Age of Madness trilogy because I haven't read them yet. In 2025, I'll get to them, I promise. But it's in this novel that Abercrombie's writing shines. War stories, they often focus on the glory, the strategy, or the triumph of battle, but the hero takes a different approach, a very different approach. Set during a 3-day conflict in the North, this standalone novel strips war of its romanticized veneer and lays bare its chaos, futility, and the human cost. The titular heroes, they're not shining paragons who you might expect. Instead, they're a motley collection of soldiers, leaders, and opportunists, each grappling with their own motivations, fears, and failings as the battle unfolds. If you've read any of Abercrombie's work, you'll know he has mastered characters. The Heroes is no different. This isn't a story of faceless armies clashing on a battlefield. From the grizzled veteran Crawl who just wants to survive to Black Dow, the ruthless leader of the Northmen, each character is vividly drawn and achingly human. You'll meet idealistic soldiers who lose their faith in the cause, pragmatic fighters who cling to survival at all costs, and commanders who are painfully aware that their decisions will mean life or death for hundreds of men. Abercrombie has a knack for making you care deeply about characters, even the ones you might initially despise. And that emotional investment makes the stakes of the battle hit harder than any grand strategy ever could. The Heroes is one of the most unflinchingly honest portrayals of war that I've ever read. Abercrombie doesn't just show you the blood and the gore, he shows you the toll it takes on the people who fight it. He explores the absurdity of war, where battles are fought over hills of little strategic value and lives are sacrificed for the sake of pride and politics. And yet, he never loses sight of the individual human stories within the larger conflict. The Heroes is not just a great war story, it's a great human story. It's about the choices we make under pressure, the compromises we live with, and the ways we try to find meaning in the midst of chaos. Whether you're a fan of the First Law universe or you're new to Abercrombie's work, this book stands on its own as a powerful, thought provoking, and deeply affecting read. Set in a near future America ravaged by climate change, economic collapse, and societal breakdown, Parable of the Sower tells the story of Lauren Olamina, a young woman with a vision for a better future. Lauren lives in a world where communities are they're just barely holding out against violent chaos. Water is more valuable than money, and desperation has turned humanity against itself. Amid this bleak landscape, Lauren has an extraordinary gift: hyper empathy, the ability to physically feel the pain and pleasures of others. It's both a blessing and a curse, making her uniquely attuned to the suffering around her, but also leaving her vulnerable in a world where compassion is often a liability. What sets Parable of the Sower apart is the resilience and the determination of its protagonist. As her community crumbles and she's forced to flee into a dangerous and lawless world, Lauren begins to develop a new belief system she calls Earthseed. Its central talent is that God is change, and it reflects her understanding of adaptability and growth in the face of adversity. Through Earthseed, Lauren envisions not just survival, but a future where humanity can rise above its divisions and create something better. This idea of planting seeds, both literal and metaphorical, becomes a powerful symbol of hope amidst despair. Butler's writing is as raw and unflinching as the world she portrays. This isn't a dystopia with a neat escapist resolution. Butler forces you to confront the uncomfortable truths about human nature, systemic inequality, and the fragility of civilization. Yet, amidst the darkness, there's a profound sense of hope. Lauren's vision isn't about blind optimism, it's about hard won resilience, the belief that change is possible, but only if we're willing to fight for it. The themes of Parable of the Sower feel almost painfully relevant today: climate change, economic disparity, and the erosion of trust in institutions. Butler wrote this in 1990, but it reads like a chilling reflection of our own current moment. It's a stark warning of what could happen if we don't address these issues, but it's also a reminder of the power of visionaries like Lauren, who refuse to accept the world as it is and dare to imagine something better. Parable of the Sower, it challenges you to think about how we shape our world, what we owe to each other, and what it takes to create a future worth living in. It's harrowing, it's hopeful, and it's one of the most profoundly moving stories I've ever read. This one, it's going to stay with you, not just because of its warnings, but because of the strength it offers in the face of them. Imagine waking up to a world completely changed, not by some grand catastrophe, but by the power of your own subconscious. This is the premise of Ursula K. Le Guin's The Lathe of Heaven, a mind bending exploration of power, morality, and the unintended consequences of playing with reality. The story follows George Orr, an unassuming man with an extraordinary and terrifying ability. His dreams can alter reality. Each time he experiences what's considered an effective dream, the world around him shifts to align with the dream's contents, and it's often in ways he cannot predict or control. Enter Dr. William Haber, a psychiatrist who believes he can harness George's power to create a utopia, only to find that each attempt to fix the world results in unintended and often catastrophic consequences. What makes The Lathe of Heaven extraordinary is how Le Guin handles its high concept premise with a deeply human touch. On one level, it's a speculative science fiction story about the nature of reality and the ethical dilemmas of wielding godlike power. On another level, it's an intimate character study of two flawed individuals: George, who just wants to live life as an ordinary man, free from the burden of his dreams, and Dr. Haber, whose well meaning but increasingly hubristic interventions reveal the dangers of unchecked ambition. The philosophical undertones of the novel are where Le Guin truly shines. Through Georgia and Haber's interactions, she probes profound questions. What does it mean to improve the world? Is it possible to impose order on something as chaotic and multifaceted as reality without losing what makes it meaningful? And better yet, who gets to decide what's better for everyone? These questions aren't answered outright, but are instead woven into the fabric of the story, leaving you to grapple with them long after you've turned the final page. Now, if you've never read Le Guin, first off, you're doing yourself a massive disservice. She's the most elegant and lyrical writer in speculative fiction. The Lathe of Heaven is a great place to start for people new to her work, and for an added bonus, you really should pair it with Philip K. Dick's Ubik. It's been said that The Lathe of Heaven is a response to Ubik, and they're really fun to read with that in mind. There are horror novels, and then there's The Shining. Even decades after its release, it remains the gold standard for psychological and supernatural horror. The kind of story that just gets under your skin and it stays there. At its core, The Shining is about Jack Torrance, a man on the edge trying to rebuild his life after a series of personal and professional failures. When he takes a job as the winter caretaker of the Overlook Hotel, a remote and imposing lodge buried deep in the Colorado mountains, he sees it as a chance for a fresh start. But the Overlook has other plans. Jack's descent into madness is the centerpiece of the novel, and what makes it so compelling is how deeply human it feels. King doesn't just show us a man being driven mad by malevolent forces, he shows us a man whose flaws, frustrations, and weaknesses are exploited by the hotel, turning every one of his inner demons into outward horrors. Jack isn't just a monster. He's a man you might pity, a man you might even recognize. And that makes his transformation all the more chilling. The supernatural elements are, they're of course they're iconic. The Overlook Hotel is a character in its own right, brimming with malevolent energy that seeps into every corner. From room 217 to the ghostly partygoers in the ballroom to the chillingly cryptic warnings of red rum. The hotel is both a physical and psychological labyrinth, feeding on the vulnerabilities of its inhabitants. But what makes The Shining truly terrifying is how seamlessly King weaves the supernatural with the psychological. Is Jack's madness entirely the work of the Overlook, or is it simply amplifying what was already there? The ambiguity is what keeps you turning the pages and looking over your shoulder. The Shining is more than just a horror story. It's a masterclass in tension, atmosphere, and even more so, character development. It is King's writing at his absolute best. He doesn't rely on cheap scares. He builds dread layer by layer, pulling you into the claustrophobic isolation of the Overlook until you feel as trapped as the Torrance family. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights, every shadow in the corner becomes a source of unease. The pacing is deliberate, almost methodical, as King ratchets up the tension to an almost unbearable degree before unleashing the full force of the Overlook's horrors. This reread reminded me of how much The Shining is a story about the cycles of abuse and the horrors we inherit. Jack's struggles with alcoholism and his violent outbursts, they echo his own traumatic past, and the Overlook becomes a magnifying glass for these patterns, amplifying them until they threaten to consume everyone around him. It's a deeply psychological exploration of how fear, rage, and even love can coexist in the same space, and they create a cocktail of emotions that's as unsettling as the ghosts haunting the hotel. The Shining remains unmatched because it's not just about scaring you. It's about making you feel. It's about the small human moments that resonate long after the last horrific image has faded. We have Danny's quiet bravery, and Wendy's desperate determination, and ultimately Jack's tragic downfall. It's a book that lingers not because of the blood and terror, though there's plenty of that, but because it taps into something universal. Our fear of losing control, of hurting the ones we love, and of monsters, real or imagined, that we carry within us. The Shining isn't just a horror novel, it's a literary masterpiece that continues to redefine what the genre can be. Whether you're reading it for the first time or you're returning to its haunted halls, it's a story that chills, captivates, and reminds you why Stephen King remains the undisputed master of horror. And there you have it, my 10 favorite books of 2024. It's been such an incredible year of reading, filled with new discoveries, unforgettable characters, and stories that pushed me to think, feel, and even dream differently. Whether it was the haunting atmosphere of The Shining, the mind bending exploration of reality in the Lathe of Heaven, or the sharp edged grit of the heroes, each of these books left a lasting impression on me in its own unique way. But now I want to hear from you. What were your standout reads this year? Did you discover a new favorite author, or did you dive into a genre you've never explored before? Are there any books you'd recommend I check out in 2025? Let's keep the conversation going in the comments. I love hearing your recommendations and your thoughts on what you've been reading. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your fellow book lovers. And of course, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, because every subscriber inches me one step closer to taking over the galaxies. Until next time, take care, keep reading, and I will see you on the next one.